Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing some sewing theme cards with die cut and press plate techniques using the new Buttons and Keepsake collection from Spellbinders. We have that beautiful Couture Dressform die set as well as the Keepsake Swans die set. Then we have the Heirloom Words press plate and die set. I'm going to foil this one for all of my sentiments for my cards. Then we have this nice and large vintage Atelier press plate. This is a 5x7 press plate, so you could do larger cards with that as well. We have the Haberdashery Buttons embossing folder, perfect for backgrounds. And this is my favorite of the two embossing folders. This one is called Ribbons and Seams, perfect for backgrounds, even like mixed media style projects I think would be good with this one. So I'm going to start by using that large background press plate, and I am going to foil it onto a few different colors of cardstock. I have Oceanside cardstock here, blush cardstock, as well as white hammermill cardstock. And I am going to be doing 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch cards. I'm not going to be doing really large cards here, but you certainly could. However, you can tell that that press plate is a little bit larger than the gray base of that glimmer system. So I wait until my glimmer system is nice and hot. I put the plate with the pattern side up, put the foil with the pretty side down, and then put my cardstock on top as well as the rest of the press plates before pressing that timer button. Once that timer button has stopped flashing, I can put it through my Platinum 6 machine for the pressure. You need both the heat as well as the pressure from the die cutting machine for doing that foiling. Once I have my backgrounds done, I'm going to do my sentiments. I'm going to do my sentiments on different colors of cardstock as well, so that I have a lot of choice when I'm creating my cards. Any of the extra sentiments can just be used for other projects, so they're not going to go to waste, but I always love having lots of choice when it comes to having lots of sentiments when I'm creating. Once I'm done doing the regular foiling, I'm going to bring out my solid hot foil plate and use up all of those excess foil pieces. This is going to work perfectly for those backgrounds. Sometimes I'm going to be using them as mats on my card. I love making sure that I can use as much of that foil as possible. So instead of using the patterned hot foil plate or press plate, we're just going to replace that with the solid hot foil plate, reuse the foil that was remaining from doing the regular foiling. The stacking is exactly the same, and then we can use all of that up and I can throw the release sheet or that little clear sheet away. And I'm doing this on all the different colors. I thought it would be nice to see that matte gold foil with the different colors in both the regular foiling as well as the solid hot foiling. Now I'm using matte gold foil here because I thought it would give it a really nice classic look to it, but you could use whatever colors you want. I think this collection can really lend itself to being really creative and vibrant with your colors, or really classic. I think you can have a lot of fun with it. And my schooling background is taking fashion design for a couple of years after high school, and I absolutely loved it. So this really speaks to me. Now, I never went to do that as a career, but I just love anything to do with like sewing, especially with dress forms and dressmaking and that sort of thing. Now on this Oceanside cardstock, when I was doing my foiling, there was a lot of over foiling with that foil. So I'm going to clean that up before I do my die cutting. Now I use a wide piece of the Best Ever craft tape. I put it on my shirt a couple times to take away a little bit of the sticky. And you can see with just using that, how much cleaner those two bottom lines are than the top lines. Once I've used the tape, because that's the most gentle method, then I will take a sand eraser and go over top of it lightly just to clean it up even more. And you can see there's a huge difference between the top sentiments on this sheet and the bottom ones. So it definitely makes a big, big difference, but I would definitely suggest using that Best Ever craft tape first because it's the more gentler way to remove that excess foil rather than the sanding. The sanding to me is the last step because sometimes just using that tape is enough to clean it up or clean it up completely. So once I have all of those sentiments cleaned up and I did the rest of them off screen, I can match up my coordinating die. I do tape it in place with the thin or the narrow Best Ever craft tape, and I reuse those pieces of craft tape for taping my dies over and over again until they don't stick. I do not reuse the tape that I used to clean up the foil because the back of that tape is going to be filled with foil and it's really not going to stick to too much afterwards. So I will die cut all of my sentiments and set them aside to have ready to grab as I'm creating. Now the very first two cards that I'm creating are going to be super, super simple. They're just really going to be highlighting this beautiful background with just a simple sentiment on it. So I'm using the solid and regular foiled backgrounds with the Oceanside cardstock. The solid hot foiled one I'm going to use as a matte, and I trim that to 4 inches by 5¼ inches. The regular foiled one I'm using inside that, and I trim that to 3¾ inches by 5 inches. And then I'm just going to add one of the solid hot foiled sentiments. This one is one of the solid hot foiled ones on white cardstock. It's going to coordinate with the card base that I'm using. I thought it would just stand out a little bit more than, say, the solid hot foiled one on Oceanside cardstock. The next card is going to be very similar. However, I'm using the white solid hot foiled as well as the white foiled one. And I'm going to add some ink blending on the foiled one. So I'm using some Worn Lipstick Distress ink, and I'm going to do about the middle third of the card. This is going to coordinate with the different colors that I'm using in these cards. That's why I chose these two particular colors. For the bottom third of the card, I'm using Uncharted Mariner Distress ink, which is going to create a little bit of kind of an ombre background. You can see that the foiling really shows up on that dark background. It's a little bit more subtle on the top of that. Now, like I said before, I chose matte gold foil. I really went back and forth as to whether I wanted gold or silver for this. I think it would be absolutely gorgeous with either one, but I do think the matte foils are a little bit more of an elegant, classy look for this particular theme. Once I have those layers together, and they're trimmed the same as the last card, the solid hot foil piece is 4 inches by 5¼ The inside piece that we inked is 3¾ inches by 5 inches. I just added a simple sentiment. So these were super quick and easy to put together. It took longer probably for waiting for that glimmer system to completely heat up and foil those pieces than it did for assembling that actual card, but they create such a beautiful look to them. For the next card, I'm going to be using the Couture Dressform. I have the Dressform itself die cut out of some gold pearl cardstock, and then I die cut it out of some fawn cardstock as well for the actual Dressform part, and trimmed off the top neck part as well as the little stand that was on the bottom and glued that on top. To me, it just looked a little bit more like a brushed gold pole with a like muslin or whatnot fabric dress form on it. And it also gives you a little bit of a contrast between the finishes. For the dress itself, I'm using two different treasured cardstock packs. I'm using the rose gold one for the pink color there. I'm also using the antique white one. Both of those, I'm using the pearl finish. I thought they just had a little bit a nicer classic look for this. To me, they looked like they were either like taffeta or satin or something. I like that little bit of sheen that it had to it. And I chose two colors just to add a little bit more contrast. I'm gluing everything together with Barely Art glue in a fine line bottle. I use this for most of my cards. I like the liquid glue because you can move and shimmy things in place. Now, I chose to use specialty cardstocks for the dress here, but you could easily use just regular cardstock. You could add a little bit of ink blending. You could do some printed papers for that. I think that would be beautiful as well. For the background for this one, we're going to be using that Ribbons and Seams embossing folder with some Oceanside cardstock. I am going to bring out the pattern of this background with some gold ink on top of it. I'm using the Lisa Horton solid gold ink pad just so that we have some it brings out that pattern. It's a really unique pattern on there. It's not a complete solid pattern all the way across, which I absolutely love. And I think having those little gold accents on the raised edges bring out and coordinate with the gold cardstock that I've used for the Dressform stand. Once I have the ink on there, I'm trimming this down to 3¾ inches by 5 inches, and you can barely see the ink on camera. It shows up more in real life. I'm going to be using the solid hot foiled background on the blush cardstock, so we have the pink on there as well. To bring the gold out just a tiny little bit more, I'm just doing a little bit of ink blending around the outside edges of that cardstock. I don't want my whole background. I want it to just coordinate and frame this piece in and kind of bring out the ink that's on the raised edge. If you tilt this into the light, you can see that gold ink just a little bit more, but on camera it doesn't really show up. But I guarantee you it's there, and it absolutely looks beautiful on that Oceanside cardstock. Now we're ready to assemble our card, so we're going to put that solid hot foil piece down first. Next, we're going to add our embossed and then ink or inked background with that gold ink on there. And then we're going to add our dress form with the dress on top of it. And you can see that I'm fairly liberal with the glue that's going to have contact with that embossed background, especially because there's a lot of raised and recessed areas. I want to make sure that that glue has good contact. I chose to put my dress form towards the left side of the card and then my sentiment towards the bottom right a little bit. You could center them more if you would prefer. There's really no wrong way to do this. For the next card, I'm also going to use that dress form die set. This one here is done with that antique white pearl cardstock, or the dress base is with that antique white. I basically reversed the colors of the first one. However, I'm taking the Cascading Dots stencil set. This comes out this month as well. And I'm adding some dots to that dress with some Versamark ink, and I'm going to heat emboss them with some gold embossing powder. If this was regular cardstock, I could also, or instead, use that stencil and use that Lisa Horton gold ink to stencil those dots on there. But for this, I thought the dots were perfect in that gold embossing powder. It adds that extra little bit of texture to it. And the ink, the Lisa Horton gold ink, I don't think it would stick as well to the finish of the pearl cardstock. So this was a good way to add that pattern and make sure that it was going to stay exactly where I wanted it to. The assembly for this one is exactly the same as the last one. I have that dress form base die cut out of the gold pearl cardstock. My actual body part of the dress form is fawn cardstock. Now you could add a little bit of ink blending to, say, the top of that dress form if you wanted, but I don't think it's necessary. I think the star of this is that dress that's on there, and I really like the gold stand to it. For the accents for this dress, we're using the rose gold treasured cardstock in the pearl finish. Now the rose gold is more of like a coppery look to it, except for the pearl one. The pearl has a more pink tone to it, and I just thought it was perfect for these dresses and to give it a little bit of a classic look. I'm also using my handy tool set in order to pick up some of those small die cut pieces, especially the teeny tiny knot part for the bow of the dress. It's really handy to add just a dot of glue to the center of that bow or that tie, and then just be able to pick up that piece with that handy tool set. For the background of this card, I'm going to use the Haberdashery buttons embossing folder. I'm using it with some of the blush cardstock, and then we're going to also use that gold ink pad to bring out those buttons in the background. If you wanted them to be more subtle, you could easily leave it as just blush cardstock there, but I think the gold ink ties in all of the different golds as well as bringing out the different buttons that are on that background. I'm using some gold pearl cardstock for the mat for this card. I have that trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My embossed piece here is trimmed down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. So you can definitely see the gold ink on the pink cardstock here more than you could see it on camera on that Oceanside cardstock. I was a little bit heavier with it on this background than the Oceanside one. You can easily be lighter with it if you want it to be a little bit more subtle, or you could do a tone on tone, have that blush cardstock and then say use a pink ink just to bring out those embossed details. Either way, it's totally fine. I think this one would be a really fun embossing folder to take some circle die cuts and create some button embellishments with too. I didn't end up doing that for this video, but I think that would be a fun option for this. You could easily use those buttons as, say, ornaments at Christmas time. I think that would be really fun. So I am adding my gold piece to my card base as well as my embossed piece. Then I'm adding my dress form with my polka dot dress there. I chose to do the polka dot dress on this one because I think it coordinates with those buttons in the background. Then I added my sentiment, and I once again kept my dress form to the left of the card. My sentiment is towards the bottom, towards the right of the card. I really like that layout, so I kept going with it, but you could center it easily if you wanted to have both of those pieces a little bit more centered. For my next card, I'm using those Keepsake Swans. Now, to add a little bit of extra texture, I die cut my swans out of some white velvet cardstock. I love using animal dyes with velvet cardstock because it's a super easy way just to add a different texture to your cards. They die cut, or the velvet cardstock die cuts just like regular cardstock. So there's no special tools needed or no special way of die cutting it, but just it simply adds that extra little bit of texture. I have the eyes and the beak die cut out of raven cardstock as well as carrot cardstock. These are all being glued together with that Barely Art glue, laying them on top of each other. My bows are die cut with a combination of that blush cardstock and that rose gold pearl cardstock so that we have different textures with that. One of those swans has a really very simple bow. The other one has one that's got a little bit more flair to it. And they're really easy to put together. The nice thing about layering dies is or especially the Spellbinders ones, when you die cut them, it puts a little indent showing you where the layers are intended to go. So there's very little guesswork when it comes to assembling them. And before assembly, I lay them all out on my surface, showing or putting them where they're supposed to go on top of the upper layers. So that I have all of those pieces there ready to go, it makes it easy for that assembly to know exactly which piece is intended to go where. Although you can see that with this particular bow, because it's asymmetrical, I had a little bit more of a challenge with this particular one. It looks totally fine on the swan, but you could see that I swapped a few pieces while I was creating. But having all of those pieces out there ready to go made it really easy to know which piece goes next and where that piece was on my surface. So once I have the bow itself glued together, or mostly glued together, I can add it to the swan. The one thing with that velvet cardstock is it does take a little bit longer for that glue to absorb into the velvet and then dry. So you do want to give it a little bit of extra time for drying. I'm going to use that ribbons and seams embossing folder for the background for this. I'm going to do a horizontal card for this one, and I'm using that Oceanside cardstock for the background so that there's a lot of contrast between the background and those swans. I'm using a piece of blush cardstock for my mat. That is trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And you can see that I used that piece to die cut my bow pieces for my swans. Once I have that Oceanside mat on top of it, you're never going to know anything was die cut out of it. And it's a great way to just extend your cardstock, especially your specialty cardstock, just a little bit more. I'm once again going to use that gold ink on top of that embossed surface, as well as put a little bit around the outside edges. Now, I didn't put it over the entire surface. I just kind of went with the pattern from the embossed background and went with different areas on that embossed background so that it had a little bit of a mixed media-ish look to it because that ink wasn't everywhere. But I do really love the look of it around the outside edges. It just ties in with the different golds that we have in our cards. And I clean my mat up between each and every card just to make sure that I have a clean mat to go to for the next one when I want to do my inking. This one here, I was only inking with gold ink, so it didn't really matter quite as much. But when I'm card making and creating with different colors of ink, you definitely want to make sure that you clean it off between each and every one so that it is dry and ready to go once you need it for your next color and you don't accidentally get the wrong color where you don't want it. Now we're ready to add glue to the back of those swans and glue them to our embossed background. You want to make sure to be generous with the glue when you're gluing on top of an embossed background so that it has contact with those raised edges there. The other great thing about using a liquid glue is you could see that I had to adjust that left swan. It made it super easy because that glue hadn't set yet. So it was easy to just adjust it slightly and move it over. The last thing that I did to this card to add some texture was I used some black enamel accents just on the eyes of the swans. On the camera, you can't see it as much, but in real life, it just adds that glossy dome dimension over those eyes, and it gives it a little bit of extra texture as well as something else to catch the light. For my last card, I'm once again going to use that vintage Atelier, I think I'm saying that right, press plate. I'm using it with my Better Press system this time, and I'm using it with porcelain Better Press cardstock, but you can see that I didn't ink my plate up. I'm just going to press that pattern into my background. This has a really cool look to it when you use those press plates without ink. It's almost like embossing, but not, because we don't have near the detail of embossing, but it presses that image into the cardstock. You definitely want to use thicker cardstock for this, so the Better Press cardstock is perfect. But it gives it that texture in that background, or that pattern in the background, that looks really cool. Now I'm going to do some ink blending on here just to bring out that texture. I'm going to create an ombre background. You could ink blend the entire thing if you want. The bottom part where the ink is darkest is where you're going to see that pattern the most. In real life, you see the pattern everywhere, but that ink really does enhance it. I just thought it was a different way of using that press plate, and I do love using press plates with no ink on them with Better Press cardstock just for something a little bit different from embossing. There's nothing wrong with embossing, but I always love different ways of using different things. So I'm using that remaining foiled background that I had created at the beginning of the video, the one on the blush cardstock. That one is just being used as the mat. I have another dress form with a dress here that I created off screen or assembled off screen. This one was done exactly like the first one that I did with that pink or that rose gold pearl cardstock, so it coordinates with that foiled background. Once I have that dress form on there, I can add the foiled sentiment on the blush cardstock. And again, a super simple card. These cards are really quite simple to make, but because of the theme and the, you know, elegant nature to them, I think they look elegant just because of the supplies and the theme. And I also really love this color combination together. Then we have the one with the Keepsake Swans, and then back to the different ones with the dress form. You can tell that the dress form was really my absolute favorite part of this whole collection. And the ribbons and seams embossing folder, I absolutely love the look of that embossing folder. It's absolutely gorgeous. Then we have our first one with that dress form, and then our very, very simple foiled background ones. This one, kind of an ombre background with that Uncharted Mariner and Worn Lipstick ink blending on the background, and then our very simple foiled on that Oceanside cardstock. Such an elegant look to it. You can find everything that I've used listed and linked down in the description box below. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.